Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into something truly terrifying: how the hostile, crushing environment of a deep cave can take a standard medical emergency and transform it into an almost impossible rescue scenario. We're going to look at the tragic reality of what happens when the human heart gives out, not in a hospital bed or even out on a hiking trail, but buried beneath millions of tons of solid rock.
So here's what we're looking at today. We'll start with the ultimate medical trap and crushed by the rock, then move into death in the deep and suspended in the dark, before finishing up with danger in safe caves and the unforgiving underground. Let's get right into it.
All right, Part 1: The Ultimate Medical Trap.
And that brings us directly into our first historical case study in Part 2, Crushed by the Rock. We're heading back to October 1983, to Dribblebis Cave in eastern Pennsylvania. The caver here is Robert Scott. He was 36 years old and actually suffered from epilepsy. He and his friends were exploring late at night, specifically to avoid the bats that normally hung out inside. But here's where things get really chilling. Robert slipped into a muddy crevice, and he got trapped just 75 feet from the entrance of the cave. Think about that, literally just steps away. He was incredibly close to the outside world, yet entirely beyond its reach.
To put this into perspective, just imagine the terrifying physical space he fell into. You've got this vertical crevice towering 80 feet high, right? But in the middle, it pinches down to this unimaginably tight squeeze of just 7 or 8 inches. I mean, that is barely wider than a human head. And the walls were rounded and coated in this incredibly slick, slippery mud. So when Robert's hand slipped, he fell straight into this exact pinch point. He was wedged incredibly tight on his left side, and he was completely unable to move an inch. Look at this timeline, because it is just agonizing. At hour 0, he gets stuck. For the next 8 hours straight, his friends are desperately pulling at him, but he just will not budge. By hour 10 and a half, they've flown in 14 specialist rescue workers. And the truly heartbreaking part about this, the rescuers were so close they could actually touch his face. They were feeding him coffee and hot dogs right through the gap in the rocks. They even managed to get him his epilepsy medicine, but they just couldn't get any physical leverage on him. And as Robert panicked and thrashed around in the mud, he only wedged himself in deeper. Finally, after 29 horrific hours in the freezing cold, experiencing absolute terror with that unyielding rock pressing down on his chest, Robert went into irreversible shock, and that triggered fatal congestive heart failure. Now, Robert was trapped just 75 feet from the entrance, which really leads us to ask a much darker question. What on earth happens when a medical emergency strikes not right near the surface, but at the absolute bottom of the earth?
Well, let's find out in Part 3, Death in the Deep.
Let's look at Michel. He was a 58-year-old expedition leader exploring the unforgiving Pyrenees mountains in a cave known as the Pit of the Crows. Now, Michel was incredibly fit for his age. Honestly, he was leaner and faster on a rope than guys half his age. But he carried a hidden danger. 6 months prior to this trip, his doctor had warned him about an irregular heartbeat and specifically told him to avoid extreme physical stress. But like a lot of seasoned experts, Michel figured he knew his own body best. He completely ignored the warning and led this grueling, full-day descent on massive vertical shafts and across underground rivers. And they went deep. I'm talking a staggering 500 meters down. That is half a kilometer straight below the surface of the earth. At 3 in the morning, while the team was resting on a dry ledge in their bivouac sacks, Michel woke up taking these short, shallow gasps. His heart just completely gave out. His teammates desperately tried to perform CPR for over 30 minutes in the freezing cold, kneeling in a space barely wide enough to even move their arms. But it was too late. He had suffered a fatal cardiac arrest right in his sleep. And here is where the sheer horror of that depth really becomes clear. It took 6 grueling days just to recover his body. His 4 surviving teammates were so completely exhausted, they simply could not physically carry a lifeless body up hundreds of meters of rope and across those underground rivers. They actually had to leave him behind. In the end, it took a massive team of 40 professional specialist rescuers, building entirely new rope systems, pulleys, and counterweights just to haul his stretcher up those incredibly narrow shafts to the surface. Mitchell's wife later shared this incredibly powerful, somber thought with reporters. She said she had practically begged him not to go on this expedition. But she also noted that he just smiled at her and said he would much rather die in a cave than in a hospital bed. So despite the absolute logistical nightmare of recovering him, he really did meet his end exactly where he wanted to be, doing what he loved.
His doctor pointed out later that between the freezing temperatures, the thin air, and that extreme physical effort, his compromised heart honestly never stood a chance.
Now, Michel's heart gave out quietly while he was sleeping on a solid rock ledge. But that sets up a truly terrifying mechanical question for our next scenario. What happens when your body completely fails you mid-ascent while you are dangling on a thin nylon rope? Let's jump into part 4, Suspended in the Dark. This is Frank's story. It's the summer of 2009 in a northern Alabama pit cave. Frank is a seasoned caver with 30 years of experience under his belt. He does the super smooth 120-foot rappel down a vertical shaft. No problem at all. He spends the next 3 hours crawling through mud and mapping out side passages, but leaving the cave meant climbing back up that same 120-foot rope using ascenders. We're talking 20 to 30 minutes of absolutely brutal, non-stop vertical exertion. So Frank is climbing, and at exactly 60 feet, dead center, halfway up the shaft, he just stops. His breathing gets ragged. Suddenly, this crushing pain hits his chest, and his left arm goes completely weak.
He was having a major heart attack, suspended 60 feet in the air. There is absolutely no ledge to lie down on. He's just hanging there, breathless, in the pitch black, and he couldn't even speak loudly enough for his friends down below to hear what was going on. This was the ultimate race against time. A rescue team didn't arrive for 2 hours. One of the rescuers literally had to rappel down from the top, clip a second rope onto Frank's harness, and then painstakingly haul him up those final 60 feet, a process that took over an hour. Doctors said if that attack had happened even 10 minutes later, when he was further from help, he absolutely would have died hanging in the darkness. Frank survived, thankfully, but he permanently retired from caving that exact same day. All right, so far we've looked at extreme physical entrapment, profound depths, and massive vertical rope drops explored by seasoned cavers. But it begs the question, can a seemingly safe, family-friendly tourist cave be just as deadly to the average person? That brings us to part 5, danger in safe caves. Take Cumberland Caverns in Tennessee. It is famous for its perceived safety. We're talking huge open chambers, bright lights, paved paths, guided tours. It feels like a walk in the park. But in 2004, a 54-year-old man named David, who was acting as an adult leader for a church youth group trip, brought a hidden danger inside with him. David was overweight and dealing with high blood pressure, issues he was actively hiding so the kids wouldn't worry. He pushed his body way past its limits, and as the tour hit this really long, steep uphill section deep inside the cavern, the strain of just trying to keep up with a bunch of teenagers finally caught up to him. He sat down on a rock ledge to catch his breath, but then his left arm went numb, this crushing weight hit his chest, and he just collapsed sideways. Now remember, this is a supposedly safe environment with paved paths and lighting. But the sheer subterranean distance, just how far deep they walked into the earth, meant it took 40 agonizing minutes for a medical team with a defibrillator to actually reach him from the surface. They shocked his heart 3 times, but it was just too late. That 40-minute delay cost David his life, right there in the dark, surrounded by the very students he was just trying to show a good time.
Which leads us to our final section, part 6, the unforgiving underground. The big takeaway from this explainer is definitely a provocative one. When you are separated from the surface by millions of tons of solid rock, there is simply no such thing as a routine medical emergency. The crazy logistics of underground rescue multiply the danger of literally any physical ailment by 100. It really makes you stop and wonder, just how fragile does the human body truly become when we strip away every single one of our surface-level safety nets? It is definitely a sobering thought to leave you with today, and a really stark reminder of the sheer, unyielding power of the earth right below our feet.